And welcome back to Jeff Koinange live on the road. Here we're at Taifa Hall at the University of Nairobi, and it's a town hall meeting with a very important subject that's not just countrywide or regional, it's a global subject. It's climate action or climate change. And I've got a panel of experts and stakeholders here. I'm going to introduce you from the far end. We start off with Mithika Mwendwa. He's the executive director of PACJA. Right next to him is Elizabeth Wathuti. She's a celebrated youth climate change advocate, and she's been in the news a lot. She's really into climate change. Right next to her and right next to me is Peter Odengo. He's the head of climate finance and green economy unit at FALOCA, or FLLOCA. Right next to me on the left-hand side is German ambassador to Kenya, Somalia, and Seychelles, Sebastian Groth. And right next to him is Nasra Nanda. She's an MCA with Nairobi County and also the CEO of Kenya Green Building Society. And on the very far end, Michael Okumu. He's the Deputy Director, Climate Change, Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Forestry. And before us is an audience of students from the University of Nairobi who have been very patient this evening. Give yourselves a round of applause, guys. Go on. Makofi. Excellent. Thanks so much for your time, everybody. A very important subject. Ambassador, let me start with you. On the heels of the ACS, Africa Climate Summit, after that COP28, after that UNEA, what lessons have we learned from then? What's the take home?
First of all, Jeff, let me thank you and your team to putting up this important subject tonight. We are running against hard competition, Bayern Munich against Arsenal.
Yes, tonight.
I think so. I would like to thank everybody here in the room and also on the screens that you are still interested in climate change. It is a very important subject, as you said, a global subject. The month of January, February, and March were the warmest ever on record in global temperatures. The temperatures in the oceans in all 3 months were also on a record high. We have floodings in Dubai and in Oman, never seen in this sense and strength before. So it is a very important challenge. Kenya and Germany in this regard are very important partners. You mentioned the African Climate Summit and COP28. You mentioned UNEA, and I can only say that in all three fora, in all three global events, Germany and Kenya partnered closely to bring things forward against a geopolitical environment that is also not getting easier. If you look to the conflicts in the world, Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, Gaza, now Iran, Israel. So we have really also the responsibility to keep climate policy and climate change policy on the agenda and look for success stories also in international climate negotiations. And I think Kenya and Nairobi is playing a key part in this regard.
Absolutely. Peter Odengo, let me turn to you and ask you, are we losing this war? Because we're here for the long game. Are we losing it?
We are winning the war. We started many years ago, 1975. We moved to 1992. We moved to 1997 when we were talking on the intensity of the impact of climate change. But today, as we are sitting here, Jeff, it's a very great moment, and as you say that, let's follow what happened in the Africa Climate Summit. One, Kenya catalyzed the action to the international global scene. Two, Kenya promised the entire Africa that we will deliver the most transformative, paradigm-shifting mobilization of climate finance to finance adaptation at the local level. And as I'm talking to you, all 1,450 wards received their first 10 billion Kenya shillings to finance local adaptation action. And I thank you, the government of Germany, government of Kenya, Mithika too, that we have delivered it pesa mashinani. It means we are not losing it. The promises that have been given, we have been tracking the money, but in Kenya, we are not losing it, but we are also not happy because whatever was promised must be delivered in scale. We should not go and follow it up. My grandmother is suffering. You saw the flood today. You have just projected it. Dubai can fix the flood. But the Nyando Plains, the Tana Delta, Budalangi, it is a challenge. It is therefore key that the money must follow the actions and the impact.
We'll get to the money in a moment. Nasser Nanda, let me ask you this, because you're a member of Nairobi County, right? Assembly. If what happened in Dubai last night happened in Nairobi, you know we'd be all underwater, you know that?
Yes, I do, Jeff.
What needs to be done, Nasser? And I know you guys are, you're trying your best. You're clearing the drainages. You're doing your best to make sure that the flooding doesn't extend into 48 hours, 72 hours. What more can be done?
I think the first important thing, and firstly, just, thank you so much for having us here. It's a very, very important evening here because the future is with us as we discuss this conversation. So I think the first thing is, in the past, cities and local governments were not included in this conversation. So why was last year so important? Last year, we saw the climate and development agenda take the Global South perspective. And I think that's not been done before last year. So I'm starting to see a shift in Global South problems being given Global South solutions. So I think that's critical. The second is the realization that cities can either help or harm nationally determined contributions when it comes to the climate conversation and the development agenda. So yes, you're right, Nairobi would have been underwater if it happened in Nairobi. And I think in part is because the Global South is largely a reactive market and not a proactive market. We wait for problems to happen before we now think of solutions. I think what we need to learn, if Dubai is suffering, we need to now be proactive. And proactive means we need to have county climate action plans which prepare for how we can respond, not react as we deal with disasters. I think that's one. And two, we also need to work closely with national level and national authorities to see how we can collaborate as partners. I think the problem is at county level, we think we need to manage it on our own. At national level, perhaps things are done at a national capacity. We need to see that intergovernmental partnership coming out really strongly so that we prepare and respond, not react.
Absolutely. Mithika Mwenda, we're talking about responding and moving forward and beating and winning this battle. But we need money, like Peter Ohengo said, we need the funding.
Yeah. Thank you very much, first and foremost, for organizing this, organizers of this very important townhouse. The point here is how do we respond? First of all, we have what Peter has talked about, the means of implementation. Because we have the Africa Climate Summit, which you have mentioned very rightly. From there, and Mark, by the way, this was very, very unprecedented. For the first time, even if we lack anything else, we in the African Climate Summit, which had galvanized not only Kenyans, but all Africans, and bringing them together, going to the COP28 with one voice, and really backed by the leadership from our negotiators up to our president, led by the president of Kenya, who is the head at the African Union. And so we were very expectant. We needed money. We needed money for loss and damage. We needed climate finance for adaptation. We needed climate finance to really ensure we build resilience for communities, which are last mile communities at the front line of climate crisis. But of course, we had a lot of commitments. And what we are saying as the civil society is, how many COPs are we going to have so that we implement, as a public policy analyst and a practitioner, there is one thing, we are very good in doing policies. We go to every COP. We go to the Africa Climate Summit. We end the Nairobi Declaration, the Nairobi outcome. We have the COP28, promise of $700 million loss and damage, which we were celebrating. And by the way, us, we didn't celebrate because that is too little. So what we are saying and asking is, how are we going to implement this? And that is where we are now. Are we going to have to be going to every COP, every meeting, and then we are going to have another Nairobi Africa Climate Summit in the next year? And then, are we going to look at what we agreed? Are we going to implementation? So the issue here and responsibility we are talking about, and I'm very happy we are with the ambassador of Germany here, because at international level, Kenya, for instance, need 62 billion US dollars. That is 6.2 trillion Kenya shillings for implementation of its NDC. So look at what is the Kenya's budget. It's 2.8 trillion. So we need twice that to implement. Where is it going to come from? We require, according to that NDC, and I think Kumu is here, we are going to contribute that 13% of that. The rest is conditional, going to come from international community according to their responsibility. So these are things we are talking about. We make policies, NDCs, National Adaptation Plan, flock at those others, but what we lack is resources to really implement.
So Michael, let me ask you, Okumu, let me ask you, from the government's perspective, what do we do? I mean, it seems like one hand is tied behind the other. If you have no funding, how can we move this forward?
Oh my.
Oh, yeah, oh, my.
Yeah, let me start by saying that let's look at it from two different processes. We have the multilateral process that involves negotiations and dealing with various governments to agree on issues. Then we have local action. So the multilateral process is normally a very, very tedious and frustrating sometimes process, in the sense that all the countries have to agree on certain issues on how to respond to climate change globally, because climate change is not, it knows no borders. So it is important that all countries agree on how to move forward. And that is why we have COPs day in, day out. We have to keep arguing on how we should do what or not do what. For instance, the politics of coal comes in. There are countries who are very strong about continuing with the maybe exploration of coal, while there are countries that feel so threatened that they want things like coal to be stopped immediately. So issues of funding, for instance, according to the convention and the Paris Agreement, it is clear that developed country parties are supposed to support developing country parties like Kenya and MACU and China. Let me put it clear. China is a developing country under the convention, under the UN Paris Agreement. And these are some of the things that bring a lot of politics because of that kind of categorization of some countries that are deemed to be very high emitting countries. And therefore, getting resources to address climate action requires countries to agree on various things, including what is climate finance. That is a topic or a decision or a discussion that is still ongoing, and there are countries who are not comfortable with having clear definition of climate finance, so that they can be able to label anything as climate finance. And there are countries like us who really want clear definition so that we can be able to account how much we have received as required by the convention and the Paris Agreement. On the other hand, we also have local action. Local action now is what we do as Kenya, regardless of what others do. And partly, to link the local and the global, we have the NDC that my friend Mithika has just talked about shortly. The NDC is the nationally determined contribution. a list of actions that we undertake as Kenyans that we are going to do in a given time frame to contribute to the reduction of emissions and making people resilient to the impacts of climate change.
All right, hold that thought then. Yeah. Let me go to Elizabeth Wathuti, who's a celebrated young climate change activist. Elizabeth, your generation, and many are here in the audience with us today, are they woke to the fact, do they get climate change more than we do maybe?
I think I must first acknowledge that across the continent, we have one of the greatest resources, that is young people. So when we talk about solutions and what needs to be done, you realize that a bigger proportion of it is actually being done by a lot of young people, organizations that have been initiated by young people themselves because they have seen the challenges. And the second thing is, as we are talking about meeting the present needs, we also have to acknowledge that we need to also prepare for the challenges of the future, and that is where young people come in. So when we talk about the disasters, preparing for climate change, I think we tend a lot to be reactive, but then we forget that there is there's a young generation that is looking up to us at the same time. So my generation actually gets it, and that's why right now I think we are seeing the biggest movement of young people that are actually, challenging leaders, challenging businesses, challenging everybody around the world to step up and see the urgency of the climate crisis. And we actually saw that even during the Africa Climate Summit. I must also acknowledge that we had that opportunity to have young people represented during the Africa Climate Summit, where we had the largest gathering of young people across the continent, the African Youth Climate Assembly. And I think the demonstration was that young people do not want to just be invited to these forums, but they actually have concrete solutions they bring to the table, and they qualify to be part and parcel of the process of making decisions. And I think that was very clear, even with some of the asks and key outcomes that were coming up from the climate summit. So I think from my perspective, young people get it, and we have an opportunity now within that perspective to outreach to more and more young people, even at the grassroots levels. In terms of these initiatives, I think we need to also ask ourselves, how are we decentralizing the information to young people at the grassroots? We talk about funding, how are we decentralizing this funding to young people at the level, at the grassroots who are already engaging in initiatives? And I think a question that maybe I would hope to have also responded, maybe even in terms of FLOCA, JZ as well, what is the percentage that is going into young people's initiatives directly, not really, through other organizations, but directly, so that we can be able to make sure that we tap into this really huge potential that we have to address, the really urgency of this crisis that we are facing today.
Yeah. So, Midika, you want to say something?
Yes, Jeff. I think then the question, combining what she has said and what Okuma has said, is whose responsibility to address climate change? Because that actually has been the elephant in the room. Because now, of course, we need money, but when that money comes, it is not sufficient. At the global level, we are told there is no money, for instance, to address climate change. But we refuse to agree on that. Why? Is climate change the problem of Africa, or is it a problem of the poor people in Africa whose responsibility is really they are not the ones who have caused this problem? So that's actually what we are talking about, issues of climate justice. And what we are saying is, when COVID-19, for instance, broke out, within record time, the global community had mobilized trillions and trillions of dollars to address COVID-19. Why? I think we ask ourselves, is it because both the North and the South, that the rich countries and the poor countries were affected? In fact, they were dying even more than us. And that's why there was quick money and to address it. But when it comes to climate change, we are told there is no money. Point here is that there is money. The only problem is that the climate change is seen as a problem of Africa, of Kenya, and once they give this money, it is tokenism, it is charity, rather than really trying to acknowledge that we are addressing the global problem, which, as I normally say, is a Titanic. Right now, we in the poor countries, these young people, poor women, and those others, like what you saw in this France, we are sinking in it because we have no capacity. But now in future, all of us will sink, as you have seen in Dubai and elsewhere. So we need really to acknowledge, and these are conversations which we have at global level, that we are really either trying to solve the problem of current generation and also future generation, because without that, we are not going to bequeath it anything, because we are going to destroy nature.
Ambassador Grote, let me ask you this. When you have conversations with folks like this, does the money thing always come up? Is this a big part of the conversation, the fact that we don't have money to tackle climate change or climate action?
It is an important point, of course, but I think there was a lot of movement in the last month and years. As you said, the Loss and Damage Fund was created during COP28. Germany pledged 100 million together with the Emirates on the very first day of the conference to give it a more positive start. At least we are now at between 700 and 800 million. The other discussion, and Kenyan's president is very much pushing this forward, is about the global financial architecture and how to make it fit for purpose with regard also to climate change and to the needs of Africa. Germany has committed about 400 million euros for the development and climate partnership between Germany and Kenya, and committed 6 billion euros for the next years for international climate policy. So I think we are one of the biggest funders, even in the worldwide comparison. But I also think it's not only about money. It's a lot about politics and a lot about structural decisions that we are taking now. What we see in the world is a number of countries that are on the move. It's in Africa, it's in Latin America, it's in Asia. If we talk about Vietnam, India, Indonesia, Thailand, big economies that are taking very important decisions with regard to their energy systems right now that will pollute for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And this is not only a question about money, but this is a question about structural decisions that these investors are taking today. And I think the global responsibility is to create a framework to bring the money in good use for sustainable investments. And that was a decision also taken at COP28, where for the first time, the phasing out of fossil fuels was put into the declaration. And Kenya and Germany played a very, very instrumental role in pushing for this conclusion, because there was a lot of resistance. All the oil-producing countries, of course, don't have any interest to phase out the investment in fossil fuels. So it is about a fair distribution of resources. I fully agree, and I fully also agree with the point that Africa is dealing with a problem that it didn't create. 3% of the global emissions are coming from this continent, but Africa is paying the highest costs in terms of environmental challenges, droughts, floodings, and structural changes in the raining patterns and other phenomena. But it is not only about distribution and money, it's also about politics.
Nadia, Nasser, I see you're nodding whether you agree with the Ambassador.
Yes, I do. And I think one of the things that I'd like to probably offer a different perspective on is, one, I think when it comes to the climate conversation, the focus is skewed. We're chasing the money, but do we have a plan and a strategy on what it is we need this money for? Sometimes I find we talk about loss and damage and mitigation, and a lot of this goes over the top of a lot of communities' heads. Ultimately, when it comes to Africa, the climate conversation is a development conversation, and people are really at the heart of any resilience we're trying to build, especially because Africa is rapidly urbanizing. So for me, I would start by saying, critically for Africa, priorities are food, shelter, health. And when we explore how this climate and development conversation happens is, these weather patterns are affecting food security. And potentially, as we rapidly urbanize, there's a migration from rural to urban, which means then cities, the primary cities and secondary cities, are going to be overburdened because everyone is kind of moving on, especially the younger people. Yeah. So in this context, I think what's key is that we need to have a plan for what is a priority for Africa by Africans. Housing is a key priority for Africa. Food security is another priority. If we have a plan to address housing and food security, then cities could be a key platform to unlock that ecosystem of opportunities. When we have that plan, then we can say, because of this plan, we have a need that will need financing. Not in the reverse, not chasing finance and then saying this is our plan. Because that means we are putting the cart before the horse. One. Two, I think we've often overlooked our own local resources. By this I mean, why are we chasing foreign funding when we've not utilized pension funds when it comes to climate conversations and funding locally? And also, what's our role in terms of involving communities in climate conversations? And then lastly, what was really pointed out critically, political goodwill, or rather political action. I think our biggest problem in the Global South is, on one hand, we give a lot of power to politicians, but we also don't hold them accountable, or at least give them a plan on what we think they should do. A case in point is, recently the governor of Nairobi got Africa's first green government office. First in Africa. That didn't happen because the county government knew what a green building is. That happened because the private sector, led by the Green Building Council, said, we need to show you what step you need to take to unlock opportunities with green finance, green legislation, green housing. So sometimes I think there's that balance that we need to achieve, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, that's a good point, very good point. We're going to get to the audience in a couple of minutes, so oh, you want to applaud? Okay, you're good. Very good. One guy applaud, that's fine. We're going to get to the audience. Actually, do you have any questions so far, anybody? Any questions? Yeah, go on. Who has a mic? There's a mic somewhere out there. If you have a mic, stand up. Tell us who you are, who you represent, and what your question or comment is. Go ahead.
My name is Edith Santian. I'm from Narok County.
Speak up, please.
All right, my name is Edith Santian. I'm from Narok County, and I'm a representative of the Young Indigenous Youth. And I'm also a CEO of Nalala Tree Foundation. My question goes to the loss and damage. Now that we're not able to we're still fighting to host the San Diego Network on Loss and Damage in Nairobi, Kenya, that has been shifted to Geneva. My question is, are we even able to access the funds of the loss and damage? Secondly, the Maasai community lost 4.5 million of livestock due to the loss and damage on droughts. And my question is, how well are the indigenous community compensated? How does the funds trickle down to the grassroots levels? Lastly, the other question that I would like to ask is, how well are the indigenous youth represented when it comes to the innovations and actually to the climate space? Because with Tuti, you just talked about you talking to the grassroots indigenous youth. My question is, how do you reach to them?
Okay.
Thank you.
Michael Okumu, it's all about funding again. You know, we come back, bottom line, come back to funding.
Sure, Jeff. I think this issue of loss and damage and how soon funds could be accessed. First of all, we still have a pending issue of the location of the loss and damage fund itself that was supposed to be here, hosted here in Nairobi, but due to other global kind of politics, it has been taken to Geneva. Well, we are still complaining about it. But apart from that, access to the fund, let me say that yes, we are already experiencing a lot of loss and damage. I know even from my village down in Kisumu County, there are houses that are underwater as we speak that cannot be reused again after the floods are gone. But access to this, what I call multilateral processes, it will take time before even we agree on how to access the fund. We have to have more cops, if I may put it like that.
More cops.
More cops.
How many more cops, Michael?
Just to agree.
Oh, Michael, come on.
Just to agree.
You've had 28 so far, Michael.
Only 28.
With 70,000 participants.
Right.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to stress here is that the process is very slow and very frustrating at times. And that is why I was emphasizing that we should focus more on what we can do locally as we await for that long tiring process. There's a lot we are doing as a country, and there's a lot we can do. And we also, as a community of the globe, we also have to communicate. I mean, to participate in the many COPs and the many to come.
Okay, hold that thought, Michael. Peter Odengo, come on, these two COPs. We've had too many COPs, I think.
COPs will never deliver you what you want. 28 has indicated that there are many promises than the delivery. But let me change the narrative. If you are a young man and woman, you are either going to die or you are going to survive. And if you wait for what we call NATO, for him, Ambassador, it will be North America Treaty Organization.
North Atlantic.
North Atlantic. But here, for the youth, it is nothing going on, talk only. And that is why Okumu is right, that you will see coffins when you talk COPs, although according to him and Medeka, it is COP, but in the real sense, coffins are what? COPs are in coffins.
Corpse.
Corpse, whichever the pronunciation. So Okumu is telling you that you are going to die because of climate change.
Yes.
But let me change the narrative. The time for talking is over. We don't need many talks. One, each country now we are on our own. When it reaches climate change response mechanism and means of implementation, we are on our own. And if you don't take the responsibility, you will perish, you will cry, you will be in the halls, but nobody will be there. But how do we do it as a country? We saw this one millions of years ago, that we are on our own. One, as far as 2009, Kenya is the first country that undertook what is called the economics of climate change. And we realized that between 1% and 3% of our GDP will be lost on climate change. And as a result of that, as early as 2011, we had already come up with this National Climate Change Response Mechanism, the National Climate Change Action Plan, the National Climate Policy, the laws that we were told that you have to have regulatory framework for you to access that money. We did that, and many counties are following it. But how do we move from legislation, strategies, talks, everything? What we have done as a country, and the National Treasury is the leader. As we are talking now, we are a little bit very happy because there are also very good international announcements that we're going to make. For you, as we are talking now, 2 weeks ago, because we have changed the narrative, we have changed the design, we have changed the mechanism, we released 10.3 billion to 45 counties except Nairobi, because they are rich, and Mombasa. How? That resource is from supporting local adaptation. Because in those rural areas, within those areas, we are living in a warmer earth, and the talks will never change that. We need to respond. Financing locally led climate action is a program designed by Kenyans for Kenyans and supported by the government of Germany, the government of Sweden, the government of, and of course the World Bank, and more are coming. So 10 billion. What we need to see, how then can a young person like you go back to your own village in the world, contribute your intellect, whether you are an engineer, a doctor, or an activist, go back home. Each county has got an average of about 150 million now lying in your counties. That design included the indigenous people.
And it's accessible to the youth.
Everybody, in all those committees, at least, by the way, yesterday we were having a very good discussion with the minister. More than 50% of those committees where the decision is being made on how to use that money is made up of youth and women. And it is at the village level. And it is there. And we keep on announcing, Pesa Masina, Masina. The only thing, if you are a youth and you want to survive, we have taken money home, 10 billion is there. Next year it will be 20 billion. And of course, with our development partners, we have now changed the talk. We want Okumu and Medeka to push the global north. But as they are pushing the global north in climate diplomacy and negotiations, Peter Odengo and the local people and my grandmothers and youth are spending that money. And of course, one, it is not about establishing loss and damage. Jeff, we started establishing climate change funds millions of years ago. In 1992, we said we could not respond to climate change because there was no money for climate change. We established GEF, Global Environment Facility, 1992. Today, you are crying as if there's never been money, Afan said. Then they said, oh, GEF is not working for us. What did they come up with? Africa Needs Adaptation Fund. They established Adaptation Fund. How much money was in the adaptation? Kenya were one of the $10 million. Can $10 million build 20 bridges as a result of that? No. Then we cried again. We need more money for climate change. We established Green Climate Fund. Kenya was the first one. I was part of that. The frustration that I have, that system is not working for you, is now become a very bureaucratic rich man's facility. You can't access it. That one was a fact. Now where they were clapping for loss and damage. Loss and damage, look, it was the promise for the last 30 years from Warsaw Mechanism, 700 million. Flock alone is 1 billion for Kenya. Then 700 billion you are clapping and waiting is for 154 counties, the developing. Are you serious? So get back home and use this. And then now when we get in that adaptation gap analysis indicated that Africa priority is adaptation, Kenyan priority is adaptation as per our NDC. Everywhere my grandmother's priority is adaptation. But how much is flowing into adaptation? According to our 2021, supported by the government of Germany and the EU team, of the money that we have been using, about about 2 billion, government used more than 70%. And of that 7%, 80% was mitigation. And what was used in mitigation? It was to finance those other things. So it means that adaptation, which is our priority, which is needed in the local, is getting 0.4%.
Okay, you seem to, okay. You seem to say 2 billion shillings is nothing. Hold that thought. Any other questions from? Any other questions? Yes, sir, go ahead. Tell us your name, who you represent.
Thank you very much. My name is Sila Hamaton Sami, Mr. University of Nairobi, the Global Student Ambassador of the University of Nairobi. I'm also the CEO and founder of Endeleza Charity Campaign. My question today is, how can you address the complex interplay between social equity, environmental justice, and environmental sustainability to ensure that the environment policies and initiatives benefit all communities fairly and effectively? Thank you.
Thank you. Mithika, social equity.
I think that's a very good question, and this is what we are trying now to address here.
Yeah.
How do we balance the needs of the current and future generations and the needs of the planet? That's what we have not been able to do. The transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient, inclusive development pathways is inevitable. We have to transition. How to transition is another question altogether. You remember and bear in mind that the problem we are trying to address now was created due to our mode of production and consumption. That is what has brought us here. Fossil fuel consumption, over-reliance on oil and gas. And that's why you can see the responsibility from the north, because Germany developed based on, that kind of development. The question now is, we have two options. Either to continue developing on those pathways, or acknowledge that now we have reached what we call the end result and tipping point, and then acknowledge whether you are in the north or south, we need to develop on low carbon development pathways. Here, how does that mean? It's very positive. I've been so negative. It's positive because right now, the price of coal, fossil fuel, is crashing down like When Donald Trump, for instance, became the president of the US, he rode into presidency because Obama abandoned and transitioned the US towards renewables, and he said, I'm going to revive that. But because now, when he came back, he was voted out without having revived even once a single coal plant. Why? Because the price of coal doesn't make any economic sense. The price of renewables has crashed. And so that is the direction which we are going. And so as we drive towards the future, whether you want it or not, we have to go there. And it is inevitable. Look, right now in Germany, I think Ambassador is here, by 2035, the whole of Europe has said they are not going to allow non-electric cars. In countries like Norway, you see most of the cars, and the industrialized countries, all the cars now are going electric. What does that mean for us? Who rely, even all the cars we have parked here, all of them are junk, actually, they are important. So tomorrow they say, we are not going to allow any non-electric cars. Where are we going to take our junk? So what I'm trying to say, including even Jeff's one here, it is a junk, actually second hand. You see? So where are we going to go? So we have no choice. So, and the positive thing is that the new transition, the just transition is driven by the minerals. Africa is very rich on these minerals, the just transition minerals. The coltan here in Embu, lithium in DRC, copper in Zambia, and all these countries. So there is something positive. And I want to answer my sister, the MCA, that yes, of course, it's very difficult to get foreign money. But how are we going to generate money? What we are saying is we have resources here. And if we value add our resources, and that actually was one of the messages during the Africa Climate Summit, is how are we going to add value to our critical minerals so that now we can even use that as climate finance. Okay. We generate money that. Let me finalize, Jeff. So Museveni now, right now, is constructing a pipeline, EACOP, from Albertine region to Pemba, 1,400 kilometers of oil, and that is for export. Suppose where he wants to export that, he is told now, and that is borrowed money, that is loans. So he is told that today we are not going to use your oil again. We are transition, we are using renewables. What will happen? So the conversation we have with our leaders is, like the president, of course, he has his bet, our president. And if we discover that well, he wants to use it to develop his people, fine. But now we want to tell them, and that's the debate which we have in Africa, is really the debate about, the future. Is that really viable? We need just transition, so we have a potentially stranded assets. These assets are going to be stranded in future, so let us go renewables, and Kenya is doing very well, Africa is doing very well, we have these resources, let us utilize them, and they can create employment. We have engineers who can go into this, but we add value. That is conversation which we have. Okay, Ambassador Grota.
Yeah, very briefly to this point, because I think this is really the core of the discussion, the economic and social development, and at the same time being sort of sustainable or environmentally responsible. And this is a challenge not only for countries here in Africa or in the global south, it's also a challenge for industrialized countries. And in Germany and in Europe, we are looking in what we call a green transition. So basically, we have to change all our production system, our industry, our mobility, our heating, everything in the next 25 years after having done the wrong thing for 250 years when industrialization started. And we only will be successful in this transition if it is a recipe also at the same time not only for the environment but also for the social and economic development of the country. If people feel that it's costly and that it's a burden, we will lose them. And we already had very, very difficult discussions in this regard also in Germany, but in Europe as such. You mentioned the automotive industry, which is playing a very important role for Germany, for example. So I just want to say it's not an African challenge, but it's a global challenge to reconcile the strategy of sustainability with economic and social prosperity. And I think there's a lot to win. For example, if you look at global investments in renewable energies, only a minuscule part of the global funding and global investment is going into Africa. And why is that? The sun is shining in Africa almost every day. Wind is blowing almost every day. So there's a lot of potential also for renewables. And I think if we tell this story in a positive way, there's a lot to win. And the good thing is, in countries like Kenya, you don't have to replicate the mistakes that we did in the north. You can leapfrog to the next technology level without investing into fossil fuels or into fossil production of energy. And one thing that we are partnering in this regard with the Kenyan government is green hydrogen, for example. In Europe and in the industrialized countries, hydrogen will be one of the main energy vectors of the future, because you need, for some production processes, you just need high temperatures and high energy transmitters. And green hydrogen is the best thing that we know about as of today. And I think partnering in this regard with Kenya, with countries all over the world, is one of the strategies the German government is pursuing, because we need a global market and a global technological ecosystem, both on the supply side and on the demand side, for green hydrogen, if we are successful, if we will be successful in this global transition. And we only will be successful if it's economically and socially viable. I'm absolutely convinced about this, and I think this question is really very central in this discussion.
Absolutely. Michael Okumu, I see you nodding a lot in this, huh?
Right, Jeff. Actually, Kenya aspires also to be developed. Actually, by the 2030, we are supposed to be a newly industrializing country with a very high quality of life. We also would love to enjoy certain facilities that the West enjoys as we speak. We'd like to have, for instance, a metro that you can take from Kawangware to Kitengela, from Madare to wherever, easily, without much stress that we go through, and being very, very, affordable. The problem we have is that most technologies still are domiciled in the north. And most of these technologies and technological leapfrogging kind of means of implementation are expensive, in the sense that issues of patent rights and so on and so forth makes it very not so affordable for us to be able to easily achieve our development goals very quickly under our circumstances, due to many factors, including debt burden and so on and so forth. So our Vision 2030 is one area that the government has a clear plan of achieving with the MTPs. But the major hurdle has been the issue of, especially for leapfrogging, taking a low carbon, climate resilient kind of development pathway, is the cost of certain technologies that could allow us, for instance, we have abundant sun, and this sun can be able to power a metro from wherever to wherever. I can be able to work from my village in Nyakach, and I work in Nairobi and take a speed train quickly to my village in Nyakach and still be able to be back in Nairobi in time for work. And these are some of the dreams that people in developing countries like ours really dream of being, which we have seen in many of the developed countries. But technologies hinder us from quickly moving that direction, and the resources that are available even to take this, some of this, to to purchase some of these technologies may not be very affordable in the sense, and that is why Kenya is talking of issues like restructuring the finance architecture so that we are able also to competitively access the type of resources that we can invest in our economy to achieve our development fast enough as any Kenyan would dream.
Yeah, Michael, you're a typical ministry person. You're always complaining about money, yeah?
Not really, not really, Jeff.
Maybe it's just
not
me,
really.
but you always come up with these money issues.
Not money issues.
Okay, hold that thought. Elizabeth Waduti, you were saying?
Yeah, so I think for me, there are opportunities even in the greatest challenge. But I think for us to tap into these opportunities, we need a narrative shift. And looking at our continent, we have been for a long time framed as the continent, that is a victim of the crisis, which is true. Yes, we have a lot of people affected by the climate crisis. But I think we forego the aspect of resilience, how our communities are responding, how people are responding and taking up different solutions to be able to address this crisis. And I liked the framing of the climate summit, which was purely about Africa showcasing its resources to be able to attract capital investment. And I think being able to have that balance where, yes, we have people that have been affected by the crisis, but how do we upscale the solutions that already are being implemented within our country, for instance, within our counties? How do we upscale those solutions? Because I think they're the same things we talk about in the conferences, but if we get back down to the ground, we can be able to upscale and even make sure that we are financing. Some of these solutions may not even need lump sums of money. These are solutions that may even need, some initial funding for them to upscale and be able to replicate to different parts across our counties, across our country, and eventually around the world. And secondly, around the balance, there's a question I always ask whenever somebody's running an initiative: how do you get people to care? How do you get people to go out of their homes, plant a tree when they don't have anything? For instance, they only have 100 shillings on you at that moment, and someone asks you to go and buy a tree. What's going to make you move that money from buying food to go and buy a tree seedling? I think we need to make a balance where the initiatives are coupled up with understanding that we can also have social enterprises within the environment space. That yes, it's about conserving the environment, but we also have opportunities to be able to create, enterprises. We have the 15 billion tree growing initiatives. How many people already have, initiated tree nurseries, and how have we been able to incorporate that perspective so that the community-based organizations, youth initiatives that have been able to establish these nurseries can get some of these seedlings purchased from them? I think that creates a lot of interest within the citizens. It creates a lot of interest within people so that they can be able to see that balance between conservation and meeting people's needs. And I think it's a huge opportunity as well on green skills. The world is moving to sustainability. The world is moving to 100% environmental sustainability. How well have we prepared our populations? How well have we prepared our young people in terms of these skills? And these are green skills that can also enable our young people to have, decent job opportunities that go beyond just, kazi ya mkono, but it's also about other opportunities that can enable us to, use some of these skills and initiatives that we have to take our country, our continent, and the globe as well to the next level.
Absolutely. Any more questions on the floor? Yep. Oh, wow. Let's go here. Front row. You have a mic? Do you have a mic? Okay, go ahead.
Hi. My name is Jadanema.
Speak up, please.
My name is Jadanema. I'm an environmental advocate and marine conservationist. So my question is, okay, I'm from Malindi, and the last time I was here in Nairobi, I left, it was 1 year ago. So when I came back a few days ago, the trees that were around were cut and they were replaced to be buildings. So those buildings are vacant, they're to let. And when you cut trees, the trees emit carbon into the atmosphere, which gives the ocean a burden to sink in the carbon. So tall buildings were made, they were vacant, and we have to balance it, but like a green space, and there's still a building over there. So my second question is that the waste management is neglected, and the waste that's here flows into the rivers and it's directed into the ocean, which leads to biodiversity loss because the fish will nibble on it and they'll eventually die. Or if they don't die, they'll end up in our food chain, and we'll have microplastics in our system. So those are my questions.
How old are you?
I'm 11.
You're 11 years old?
Yes.
And you're an activist?
Yes.
Based where?
In Malindi.
In?
Malindi.
In Malindi. Well, give a round of applause. Are you here with your mother or father? Are you with your parent, or your mother's there?
Yes.
Okay. Because this is for adults only here, you know that. I'm kidding. Well done. Okay, waste management. Nasra, yeah.
So thank you so much for your question, and well done on joining us. I think, to sum up, I think your questions are related, at least to me. I think the first thing is, when we look at the environmental conversation, we often look at it in silos. So to bring social aspects, environmental aspects, and governance aspects, we need to get a platform. And the built environment is a key platform that brings together different, ecosystems that either we're trying to solve to create community, dignity, or business opportunities, or government agendas fulfillment. So for us to have all three together, you need a purpose or a platform. The built environment is a critical component of that platform. And cities become critical for Africa in particular in creating those three things in a platform that we get the results. In the context of what you've brought out when it comes to buildings, it goes back to the issue of rapid urbanization, Jeff, that I was mentioning. Now, the problem is we are looking at things in isolation. So recently, the governor of Nairobi talked about Nairobi needs to grow. That's why we have buildings. But growth of Nairobi needs to be sustainable. It needs to look at a city as an ecosystem that balances the growth, which is the urbanization component, with the waste management, because waste management goes at the heart of creating a life of dignity. And actually, the climate conversation for the Global South is dignity. And going back to your narrative, for us, the narrative for Africa is, through climate and development, we are pushing and championing for dignity for Africa by Africans. Which means, therefore, as we build, we need to be conscious that there should be a need for building without compromising the communities that depend on those resources. For example, Nairobi could be a hub of having microforests that then play a key role in creating biodiversity credits, where these microforests can then be utilized to unlock carbon financing for the city. If we look at trees as just tree planting, rather than adding revenue, adding dignity, adding a life of experiencing a city where you're proud of this city, then we take away the importance of having the greening of a city. Secondly, when you talked about overburdening our oceans, unfortunately, we look at our natural resources in isolation. The reason why our water bodies are overburdened is we've cut down trees, not understanding the ripple effect of getting rid of one aspect of natural resources. We don't look at natural resources as assets that can complement our urbanization. We rush to cement, not realizing that the very things we're trying to prevent, which is flooding, can only be prevented if we build in a way that complements nature, so that people can reap the benefits through those same trees. So that even if they're creating opportunities for themselves, whether it's feeding themselves or trading with that, it's balanced. You build, but you complement that building with the nature around you so that you can manage your natural resources in a way that not just we can benefit, but also the generations to come. And I think a lot of these conversations is centered around the fact that often conservationists and activists like Elizabeth are seen as tree huggers, but we don't look at the other part, which is what Peter is pushing for. Locally led actions unlock opportunities, financing, jobs. And if we don't put that together, then we'll have these isolated instances. So I really like your question, because what is missing there is the component of an ecosystem solution that balances nature, people, and profit. And that brings together E, S, and G. Thank you.
I think, Jeff, I want to, and the girl is asking, and actually what she's trying to answer, the issue of management. How do we manage our resources? And that then brings us, because she's talking about she came from Malindi, another time she came, she got the tree has been cut. What does that mean? How do we manage our cities, our resources, in the issue of governance? Corruption, cannot escape that. Yeah. I know when this city was being, and when Kibaki came into power, many you saw what happened, the felling of some to open roads. So this city is planned. And in fact, if you follow the original plan, you are an MCA, you realize that the original plan has got very good open spaces and everywhere. You ask yourself, what has happened? So as we look into really addressing the old systems you are talking about, we need to even to ask ourselves how we govern our resources, and hence how we even establish some of this. Everything is set. Those who planned Nairobi knew what they were doing, but what has happened is misgovernance, corruption, and that is what has met us, so that this lady is not going to have a shade in Nairobi.
How many of you remember growing up? They used to call this the Green City?
Yes.
In the sun.
Yeah. Yes.
Remember?
Yeah.
Long before you were born.
Yeah. but Jeff, yes. What really happened? One thing, the young, she's not an activist. She is a green champion. If she could afford to identify a tree a year ago and now realize that where it was, it is no longer there. That is not an activist. Activism is running around with words. But being observant and being futuristic, it means that our young generation know where they are going and they will never get lost. But how do we now create our own path and walk on our own path and remember what we have done? Our cities. Look, the governance. Who is governing New York? Who is governing London? And who is governing Nairobi? If we don't go back to locally led action and pretend that climate change with warmer temperatures is your worst enemy, Jeff, wrong. If we forget our indigenous knowledge to respond to our own action. But let me now take you. I'm the president of Africa Green Finance Networks. Africa. Now let me get out the Kenyan calf. Because the more you keep on crying, the more they keep on laughing at you. And the more you keep on walking with big bowls to beg for nothing. Building local resilience is my responsibility. It is your responsibility. The young people, I'm very happy that you are young. But when it was said that how much money is 20%, is Flocker giving to the young people, and I said 50% of the young people are a member of the committee, which we have given three things, Jeff. The power of making decisions on how to utilize that money within themselves. So the young lady, if she was given a chance, would have decided that that money should have been used, 20% or 30% or 40%, should have been used for the green ecosystem, not tree, because the ecosystem within the urban environment or within the suburban environment will now bring what things? Water is life, water is money, water is a raw material. But what about the butterfly, which is part of the biodiversity? You talked about biodiversity credit, and I'm telling you, we are going to give you biodiversity credit. I'm working on it. The policy is there. The reform is there. The government is doing super. But the problem is that there is a disconnect between what the policy makers are doing and with what the young people are pursuing. Be with us, listen to us, and don't be moved by instinct. Be moved by intellect. They grow because of intellect.
Okay, you mentioned biodiversity credit.
Yes.
What about carbon credits?
Great. I've never talked about it because carbon credits has been abused. The original design for carbon credit was to be used to mobilize additional resources to finance climate change, particularly adaptation, and in the 1990s. But now what we saw, another elites jumped into it. China got it. They mobilized it. They got almost more than everything. Africa remained behind. They developed with it cheaply. Ukumu said that now they are a member of a group. We are called G77 plus China. And now everything, even in toothpick, which was developed by carbon credits and green tech, which was transferred to them, now they are leading in solar. Even the people who gave them those solar are really complaining that now they are getting more. And so what we are saying is, one, come back home, get the government policies, you don't need more. Three, as I said, we are on our own. No any other country has never failed to come and see what Kenya is doing. And by next month, Jeff, the entire leadership of the Sierra Leone is coming here as a result of the outcome. Follow up the Africa Climate Summit. I went there. What was being announced is the success on how we are devolving climate finance through the locally led. By who? None other than the president. And they are coming here. South-South is the way to go. South Africa, which they dream to go there, came here, so what we are doing. But because they are smarter, they are now ahead of us. They have carbon credit.
Why are they smarter?
Because they follow rules of governance and they are being followed by the intellect and they are ready to transit.
And we don't.
And we don't. And when you can't transit, one, the green transition, the laggards will be left behind and you will keep on complaining. Two, those who are not transforming will be transformed by the change and they will perish. The fourth one, the dinosaurs are no longer here because they thought they were so big, they were the kings of the earth, and the Big Bang came and flushed them. Change your consumption pattern. Look at the future. Change is here. We are not threatening. But if you don't want to change, the Big Bang is coming. But we are giving you the cushion and the buffer that the resources are taking at the local level. If we have failed to transform from the global perspective, me in the African continent, that is why 5 years ago, we realized that we are not making progress in negotiation where Mdeka here is, where Ukumu here there is, and I've been with them, so I kept down. That is why we turned it what we call locally led. Locally led is simply bottom up. Yes, but locally led is the thing. But now we started from there. Have you ever heard where a 10 billion per year going to a local level in all the place at the same time with the same team? What transformational is that? It's huge unless we have no governance.
All right. On that note, I'm going to take a break right now. We've been talking for more than an hour, which is that's a lot of talk about environment. Let's take a quick break, come back, and we'll get some closing thoughts about going forward. What's the way forward? I know there's so many questions out there. We'll have to have another day, special day, to talk about this because this topic is not going to go away well. We cannot exhaust it in one night. But it's very important we keep talking about this. And thanks so much for your contribution. But let's take a quick break, come back, and get some closing thoughts from our panelists. JKLIVE at Taifa Hall at the University of Nairobi. Takes a break. We'll be back in a moment.